Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. It is 7 p.m. in Paris, 8 p.m. in Jerusalem, noon in Rochester, 1 p.m. in New Jersey. I'm Mohamed Moti from the Sorbonne University and Saint Antoine Hospital in Paris, in France. And it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to this new Journal Club broadcast by the International Academy for Clinical Hematology. And this broadcast is really a very special one because actually we are today celebrating the second birthday of the Journal Club of the IACH. We have launched this idea in November 2020, and that was in the middle of the COVID pandemic. But you know, science and advances never stop. And we decided to launch this journal club. It started monthly, then rapidly given the impressive amount of literature being published every day, every hour, every minute, we thought to go twice monthly, and it is extremely successful and highly attended. So thank you very much for being so loyal to the IACH activities and for the journal club. And the best idea we thought to celebrate the birthday of the journal club, obviously we can't organize a party virtually. We're not gonna have a big cake with candles and balloons and whatever, but we thought that maybe we need to tackle an extremely important topic. And this is why the steering committee selected this paper published in the journal Contemporary Clinical Trials Communications and entitled A Prospective Randomized Trial of Patient-Reported Outcome Measures to Drive Management Decisions in Hematology and Oncology. And we believe this is really extremely important to all of us because the patients are at the heart of everything we do. And this is why this article was chosen. You can see here the abstract of this paper, and I highlighted in yellow actually the keywords, I would say. The study objective was to test whether an electronic patient-reported outcome quality of life tool in which patients identify their primary concern during clinic visits, and the goal is to figure out whether it can improve their quality of life. And the study included solid tumors, but also hematological malignancies, mainly multiple myeloma or amyloidosis. And as you would guess, at the IACH, our focus is about hematology. A very decent number was included, 171 with multiple myeloma, 62 with amyloidosis, which is rather a rare condition. And interestingly, physical health was selected as the most often concern of the patient, followed by the cancer diagnosis in 29% of cases. Also, among the patient, the majority, 74%, thought that this tool was worthwhile, and 86% would choose the tool again, and 81% would recommend it to others. Among clinicians, also, most of them 95% responded that it was worthwhile and they would recommend it. Obviously, the trial was negative, but the conclusion is extremely important, highlighting that these PROs, especially when it comes to quality of life, are extremely important, and they are considered to be worthwhile by both patients and physicians. Here you have a figure from the paper about the different components that were used in this study. So the patients were asked to identify their single biggest concern, whether it's about personal relationship, emotional health, physical health, cancer diagnosis and treatment, health behaviors, money, we call it also financial toxicity, care planning, or even something else. Then you can see the other steps to assess your physical health. And there was then sort of a scoring or a self-assessment. And then the attending clinician or physician would review the concerns and eventually apply some actionable resources. These are the characteristics of the patient that were included. And as you can appreciate, because of the majority of being myeloma patient, the median age was around 65, 66, but it went up to 87. Diversity was there, not to the percentages we would love to see, but definitely there were there were some Black patients being included. You can see the diagnosis, but also the different treatments received by the patient, and the median was 3 up to 23. I must confess, I'm not able to guess 23 different treatments for multiple myeloma, but who knows? The conclusions and the topics we would like to discuss in this journal club is about that this tool demonstrated a significant value in efficiently eliciting patient main concern and also integrating the patient perspective into clinical consideration. It highlights, and we knew a little bit about it, but I think it's important to show it here in a trial, in a prospective controlled trial, the potential gap in patient-clinician communication and the importance of the dialogue, the counseling, and to improve communication. Of course, there are limitations here. There are some psychosocial elements, health behaviors, emotional well-being that were not considered here, but we will discuss them. And at the end of the day, if you would like to have all of this being taken into account, it's about the multidisciplinary approach. So I'll stop here as a summary, and I'd like to welcome our 3 panelists today, namely Mrs. Cindy Shimilevsky. Hi, Cindy. Dr. Shashi Kumar and Professor Shashi Kumar, Professor Arnon Nagler from Tel HaShomer in Israel, Professor Shashi Kumar, Mayo Clinic, Rochester, and Cynthia is a patient advocate, patient research advocate. So Cynthia, maybe I'll start with you first, ladies first, just if you can introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll start the discussion about this paper.
Sure. As you know, my name is Cindy. I've been living with multiple myeloma since 2008. Prior to my diagnosis, I was a 5th grade math and science teacher. My stem cell transplant failed to put me into a remission. So I retired from teaching back in 2008. There weren't all the treatment options. I don't think I could have named those 23 options that was in the study. And I knew I needed to be around to pursue different treatment options. But being a self-proclaimed science geek, I found the world of research advocacy and it intrigues me. And I love being able to give the patient perspective. Right now, I'm part of the NCI Myeloma Steering Committee. I'm on a SPOR with the Mayo Clinic. I do IRB reviews. I just love the science and I can't wait to attend the ASH meeting.
Fantastic. And I'm looking forward to our usual selfie. Remember, Cindy, we would have one every year.
We do.
Thank you for all what you're doing, Cindy. So, Shaji, my first question here is to you because you are a co-author of this work and you have included an amazing number of patients. Can you just explain to us and to the audience the rationale behind this study and why did you do it after all? Because we always hear about PROs and everybody's excited about them, but I rarely see in plenary abstracts, we're talking about ASH, studies with randomized trials about looking into PROs.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mohammed. This is, an important aspect of the care of our patients. I know for years we've been so focused on making sure we have treatments that gives good response and prolonged survival. And I think we have made a lot of advances there, and it's the right time for us to start thinking about other aspects and, just kind of going back to that concept of looking at patients as, in entirety, not just looking at the disease. And I have to, start by just congratulating Dr. Rama Varsame, who is part of our myeloma group, who led this study. It's not easy to do these kind of studies, and she did a phenomenal job in pulling it together. And the very fact that we are talking about it today, it's testament to its importance of this aspect. So I think a simple way of answering your question, Mohammed, is if you go shopping without a shopping list, we'll forget a few things for sure, right? And I think patients face the same dilemma. They will have so many things they think of at home. I'm sure Cindy can tell us more about this too. Is the moment you walk into the clinic, you have 30 minutes, 20 minutes, and the first thing that you hear, the first thing you want to know is what's happening with your disease. And if you see that it's going in the right direction, you feel so happy. And if it's not going in the right direction, you feel so sad. Either way, you forget about everything else that you actually had thought about at home and wanted to ask about. So in a way, I think this provides people with a really nifty tool that they can think of, outline their concerns ahead of time so that the physicians, the providers walking into the room to see the patients already know what things they're concerned about over and beyond the disease itself. And then, from the patient's perspective, they don't forget it. And I think it really allows providers and the entire care team to really look at overall what are the concerns and how do we make sure the most prominent or the ones that the patients are most concerned about are taken care of. And it also gives some kind of a serial, a trend in terms of things that are not getting better. Even though the disease may be getting better, there may be other things that are getting worse, and we sometimes don't think about it. So I think that's where the most important aspect of this is basically a excellent communication tool for the patients and the care team.
Thank you, Shaji, and I think you nailed it very nicely. And myeloma is a very good example because you can see the monoclonal component decreasing and then everybody's happy, but then the patient is telling you, well, I'm not doing well. The numbers are doing well, but not the patient. So Arnon, you've been in the field. I mean, you are our master. You've been almost for 35, 40 years. And how did you see the evolution of the integration of patient-reported outcomes in research, and how this has been evolving over time. We need your microphone, Arnold.
Sorry, thank you, Professor Moti. Yes, I mean, this was not in the beginning, and obviously was not, I don't know about 40 years, but even not 20 years ago. I think at the beginning we treated the disease, we did academic, we did science, we developed new drugs. Of course, we are human beings and we care for our patient, and it was chemistry between the doctor and the patient, but the patient voice was not so loud and was not taking into account when we designed the treatment or studies. It's more that we knew what is best for the patient, what will give the best results, and with time, the patient voice got in, and more, and rightly, because the patient is the one that is suffering, and he knows what he needs. And every patient is different. Every human being is individual and is a bit different from with his friend or neighbor, and they have different concerns. So I think that including the patient, the voice is extremely important and was not there from the beginning. As for this, I mean, this is the study. When I read it, it's one step forward because it's electronic. And this, I mean, so you do it in objective way. You can, sum up many patients, many voices. You can see if there is something, common to them. In the paper, male were different than female, age above 65, concern were different than below 65. So I think that this is in the right direction, although the study was negative, but there are other studies that show that. So I think it's extremely important and a major step forward.
No, I really like the story that indeed it's a relatively simple tool, and we should mention it has no side effects, no reported serious or other adverse events, except maybe if your iPad or iPhone or smartphone is not responding, or if your internet connection is not strong enough, maybe it can be a problem. So we need to figure out how to classify, to grade this kind of so-called toxicities of the technology. But I agree with you, very easy, very straightforward. So Cindy, you as a patient, how do you view the, you mentioned a few years ago when you got your transplant and today, and you've been following this and you are very active patient advocates. How did you see this evolution? What is your take-home message from this paper? The results are negative, but I personally agree with Shaji and Anon. It's a huge step forward to be brave enough and do a randomized trial with PROs.
Yeah, I perfectly agree with you. When I read the paper, I thought it was great because that tool is a great communication tool, just like Dr. Kumar said. When I first was diagnosed with myeloma, I really was brought up in the age of doctor knows best. So I would blindly follow my doctor's orders, believe it or not. And, when the doctor asked me, well, how are you doing? I say, well, you tell me, how am I doing? I really didn't know what to share and what not to share with the doctor. And this tool, when I looked at it briefly, really gave me ideas. Like maybe I would have never thought to share, problems with my relationship or financial toxicity with my doctor. This is my doctor. All he wants to know about are my side effects. And maybe if he told me those side effects were things that I should expect, maybe I wouldn't even tell him about them because he told me I was going to have them. So this was a great discussion tool, and I think it was well worthwhile to be part of the clinical practice. I love having PROs in clinical trials. I mean, especially now when in the field of myeloma, there are so many treatment options to choose from. And, you know, it's a good problem, but it's a problem like, how do I know what I want to do next, you know? And we talk about efficacy, we talk about, you know, side effects, but it's important to have that piece of information from patients, how they actually felt when they were on that drug, you know, and were there any other, besides those quote unquote adverse events that you have to report to the FDA, were there any other things that bothered them when they were on trials? Because if that drug gets approved, then that could be part of this decision-making process. When you choose a drug, you look at those PROs, especially if everything else is just about balanced. How do you make that decision? Well, patients tend to trust other patients. I don't know, there's something about that, you know, when you go onto a Facebook group, and I'm pretty sure you guys don't do that, but I do it a lot. I go onto these Facebook groups that specialize, you know, with myeloma patients, and you always hear, my doctor thinks I should do this. What do you think? Like, they are the second opinion. And, you know, and of course we say you have to trust your doctor, but patients want to hear other opinions. And that's what PROs do, that they give patients other patients' opinions while they're on treatment. They're also in the PRO, you know, your quality of life test there. They gave me a springboard to start a discussion, and then for the doctor to see. Sometimes you may assume what's bothering me the most, and it may not be. I may be putting on some type of front, so this helps bring out that discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Cindy. This is really very nice, and I learned something today, because I usually consider Dr. Google for the second opinion, but now I learned that Dr. Facebook is also highly qualified. Okay, so I think I need to mention this. Shaji, so we heard the opinion of Anon, and highlighting that the initial concern historically was to keep the patient alive, irrespective of the toxicity, the price to pay, because these are terrible cancers, and we're talking about blood cancers. We heard a radical different opinion by Cindy. So how do you think we can reconcile, we can put together actually what the academic, I would say, practice about endpoints in trials, looking into progression-free survival, looking into whatever toxicity, mortality, but also having these PROs? Because I always remember we had here in France a study, and I won't mention the drug because we're not advertising any drug here, where there was a dilemma that even with a minimal response, which today in myeloma we wouldn't consider, but that was a few years ago, minimal response was, you know, evaluated. And some patients were feeling well with minimal response. And then would you consider this as a failure, or actually they are taking advantage of the drug because actually they were improving? The monoclonal component wasn't improving, but their clinical status, they felt, I have less fatigue, I have less of this, etc. How do we put all this together, Shaji?
Yeah, no,
and you've done a lot of these trials.
I think it's a very, very important question. I think to Cindy's point, I'm really glad to see that majority of the phase 3 trials being done nowadays includes a quality of life component. There are different tools that are being used in different trials, but at least there are some tools that seems to be there's a consensus around its utility in patients with myeloma. So I think you see those tools commonly being used. And I think that will be a very, very important part of our treatment decision-making going forward as we consider these variety of different choices that we have. And to that point, I think, Mohammed, I think it's worth highlighting that one of the first large randomized studies to include some kind of that patient experience thing was actually the early versus delayed transplant, looking at the twist or the time without symptoms and toxicity related to therapy. So started in France in a way. So I think
the Fairmont trial from 1998.
That's right. So I think that's kind of a trailblazer for us. I think we have a large gap in between where we didn't necessarily follow that. But I think two things we need to bring up. One is obviously the treatments nowadays are a lot more effective, and patients patients remain on treatment for longer periods of time. We have gone from that concept of just giving a transplant and be done with to people staying on continuous therapy, for not only for the first line, but for each line of therapy after that. And that then brings up questions in terms of, one, long-term toxicity, that we need. These kind of tools are more than likely to pick those things up. And two, low-grade toxicities. When we talk about clinical trials, we are often just, our eyes immediately goes to what is more than grade 3 toxicity. What about the grade 1 and grade 2, maybe 70%, and we like, oh, that's okay, that's manageable. But that may not necessarily be manageable. And if you have a bothersome grade 1 toxicity that never goes away, that could have a significant impact on quality of life, neuropathy being a good example. So I think there are a lot of those things which the structured tools that we use from a clinical trial perspective don't pick up, that these kind of approaches can actually pick up, because one patient sitting at home, not thinking about the disease when they're actually outlining these concerns. And then, of course, we are able to get a better sense of how impactful these low-grade toxicities might be.
Okay, so we have a question here. Indeed, you nailed it nicely, Shaji, about the focus in general in clinical trials, but also in our communications, we as physicians, and I put myself in the group, I'm not blaming anybody. We are all in the same boat, I think, that we focus on the serious adverse events, on grades 3 to 4, and some grade 2 are really difficult for the patient. You mentioned peripheral neuropathy, especially if it has pain, even with grade 2. Diarrhea grade 2, you can't make a long trip with a grade 2 diarrhea. So Arnon, same question like Shaji, how do you view the combination, or how to synergize our goal to achieve the best, the hardest endpoint, but at the same time take into account the patient perspective?
Oh, I would say that one, luckily enough, usually when the drug works, also the patient feel better. So in most of the time, when you have a successful drug that the disease is responding, usually from a physical point of view, the patient feel better. I mean, one example that I see how, the patient perspective are very helpful, and we don't capture it in the other tools that we have, is fatigue. Sometimes, the patient have really huge fatigue, and also in the paper, this was one of the first thing in the physical, it was neuropathy, fatigue, and sleeping disturbances. And this usually the doctor cannot take it into account without the patient telling him, and he should consider it. The other thing is that in myeloma, we have many options today. And sometimes we ourselves don't know exactly if the combination on one anti-CD38 antibody is better than the other one. And so if we take the patient, reporting, then we can, in these cases, easily change the combination of the drug without jeopardizing the anti-myeloma effect. So I would say that in myeloma, the fact that we have many drugs, many combinations, and actually some people are confused and don't know, exactly what to choose, and some of it is depend on the protocols that the center have and the philosophy. I think that the patient, the reporting can fine-tune the treatment that is getting, and we can, tailor specifically the treatment to some degree we should do it and we can do it to the patient perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to remind our audience that please do not hesitate to jump in and send your comments or questions. However, we will not respond to specific personal clinical cases because we had a couple of questions which I think are very specific. I'm sure after the broadcast you can reach out to Dr. Kumar, Dr. Nagler, or even to Cindy for advice, but we will not handle, because we have questions about the impact of CAR T cells, how to compare them to bispecific, when to stop or to continue maintenance therapy. Unfortunately, that is not the goal today. Let's continue to focus on patient-reported outcomes and their value in assessing a treatment, but also in the management of patient. So, Cindy, there is this, when you look to this paper, there are several components of the PROs, and it looks like the focus of the patient has been mainly about physical health and let's say, the prognosis of the cancer, which maybe minimize the impact of the other components. You meet with lots of patients, you go to all of these patient groups, and then you mentioned also the Facebook discussions and so on. What's, in your opinion, your experience, from what you hear, are the major concerns of the patient and their families?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it depends on where that patient is in their journey. The concerns of someone newly diagnosed are very different than someone who's been in a very good remission for a long period of time, So you can't make that generalized statement, Very top of the line for any patient is they want their cancer to be under control. And that's the most important thing. So when you're talking about, what's your most concern is my cancer under control. If it is, that's when, the side effects come in, and short-term side effects, long-term side effects. Like, if my cancer is not under control, I don't care if I have to run to the bathroom every 20 minutes if this drug is going to help. But if I'm now doing well, that now starts to become a concern. So, and I think that's where your patient-reported outcomes is important, because I see them as an individualized tool. Like when you look at studies and, quality of life and all these things, you're kind of taking the average of all the patients. But with a patient-reported outcome, you're individualizing that treatment to that patient based on their response to their outcomes, and that's what I think patients really like. For me, my chemo brain is my biggest concern. Whereas for someone who is relapsing after CAR T cell therapy, they're not going to care if they don't remember a 7-digit phone number. They want something else to, to keep their myeloma. So patients, as I started out with, depending on where they are in their journey, different things really matter to them.
No, I think you are really highlighting nicely, Cindy, the issue and the complexity actually of evaluating PROs. And this is maybe one of the reasons why regulatory bodies are having some difficult time in figuring out how to integrate them in the whole assessment. Because as you nicely say, peripheral neuropathy for someone whose passion is to play piano, it can be a hell, I guess, which can be different to someone who is not manual and loves watching movies. So Shaji, we have a question here from our colleagues from Myeloma Patient Europe, for instance, about whether you would view the inclusion of PROs in registries, not only in prospective trials. And my other question, and it's going to be the same to Arnon, what's next? Where do you see the future of these PROs? Would you imagine one day that a drug with a great efficacy, but modest or maybe poor PROs not approved, and vice versa, a drug with a relatively modest efficacy, but great PROs? How do you see this field? I'm personally, I don't know the answer, you know, I'm a bit confused about all this. We need your mic.
Sorry. So it's an important question. I think with the registries, again, one of the key things with the patient-reported outcomes, we really have to be collected prospectively. It's really hard to go back into the patient charts and figure out how, you know, many of these variables. And so it really needs to be real time, whether it be in the context of a clinical trial or developing a tool that is kind of part of your electronic medical record system. Would be either way. I think it has to be collected prospectively. But I think one other key aspect of having a good tool doesn't end with having a good tool and collecting the information. It also has to be linked tightly to what you're going to do with that information. So I think that's where I think having these tools and the results be available real time within the electronic medical record for the providers is going to be an important component. And I know Dr. Varsame highlighted that as one of the disadvantages of this study, because it kind of lived somewhere else outside the electronic medical record. So, and then it brings in the important role of a multidisciplinary team to review the results of these kind of PRO tools so that, you know, everybody can address the concerns in their own domains. If it is a financial concern, can the social worker be involved? If it's a, you know, anxiety or psychological concern, can we have somebody in that area deal with that? So I think it's important for us to have a good comprehensive tool, identify the concern, have a system in place to address that concern when it is brought up, and then make sure that is resolved. Otherwise, you know, this becomes, the patients don't see value in it either. If they month after month they're telling you this is their concern and nothing gets done about it, then it obviously it ends up being you know, not really proving to be valuable for the patients. But in terms of, you know, the regulatory approaches, I think it's really hard to predict regulatory authorities, whether it's on this side of Atlantic or that side. But I think the fact that they are being included and they are starting to be key secondary endpoints in some of the studies, I think points towards this being a major thing in the future. I know some of the, you know, cancers like pancreatic cancer, for example, there are, you know, examples of drugs being approved based on improvement in the patient-reported outcomes or quality of life outcomes. So I see this as clearly a possibility in myeloma, especially that now that we are starting to see multiple molecules with similar mechanism of action or similar you know, effectiveness. The way we might pick and choose between them might be a combination of quality of life outcomes and maybe cost.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Arnon, what are your thoughts about all this? We need your mic, Arnon.
Of course, I agree. I think one thing that I learned from this paper is the fact that the patient need to be talked about his prognosis, not just at the beginning, but several times during the treatment. I personally usually don't do it. No, I mean, the overall speech and the prognosis in the beginning, but then we talk about if your patient respond or don't respond, how he's feel and how we are progressing. But I usually don't go again to the beginning and say myeloma is a devastating disease or something like this. And so this is one thing. I think that I see it as I mean, again, the regulatory and the pressure, it's hard to predict, but I would say that I would see that the regulatory agency will take it into account, only in the extreme. So let's say we have a very effective drug, but the patient, all of them, give in the reporting, so bad, then a very, very bad, let's say, score or something like this, this drug will not be approved. However, in most of the cases, I don't believe that a drug that is not working will be approved because patient reporting. I can see only the opposite. And in most of the cases, it should go hand to hand, and this is the fine tuning. So this is where I see it going. But interestingly, in this paper, 95 or 90% of the physicians give the view that it's helping them. Only 75 to 80% of the patients. So I think, the side is not just, we are all, all what you are doing is for the patient after all. But this tool help a lot the physician to take care on the patient and to be tuned and to remember, things that usually, because the doctor is also extremely busy. As Saji said, we all know 25, 30 minutes to a patient it's usually quite a bit when we have a busy clinic. So this tool help also very much the physician, reminding them on some aspects that they also can remember. So I think it's extremely important.
Thank you very much, Arnon. And I think it's good to highlight that in this study, 95% of the physicians enjoyed it, because we always complain about lack of time. Actually, taking into account PROs is not something that goes against the issue of time. So we're reaching the end of this journal club. So the last word is for you, Cindy. What would you like to say to our audience, to whoever is listening, to regulatory bodies, to other patient families? Please, the last word is yours.
Wow, you gave me an open mic. That could be dangerous, but yeah, I have so much running through my head. First of all, I'd like to thank you for including the patient voice. And I see that's being included more and more and more. And that's one of the things I would like to say is to make sure whenever you run a study, you include that patient voice in the study design, in developing the informed consent, and just looking at everything. But also when you're developing PRO tools, include the patient voice. Have them be part of the development of what you're doing, or I like the word co-creation, created together, but if you're not going to co-create something, at least run it by patients before you use it. As much as I like the tool that was part of the study, and, I would like to have a discussion about it at some time, is you only were able to pick one, or later on in the study, two of the things that concerned you most. And for me, going to a doctor, I guess those two things are always going to be health related. And I might not pick something else because when I go see my doctor, they're not going to help me with it anyway. So in my mind, I might as well just tell them the things that I know they could help me with. that maybe if they design something like you get 100 points, and with these 100 points, where would you put these points? Like, which bothers you most, which bothers you least? So you could kind of see, you know, that maybe what came in third is very, very quick, and maybe there's something that no one gives any points to and it doesn't bother anyone. So, you know, I don't know if I'm making any sense there whatsoever, but I just think including patients in that development and learning how we think, and, you know, why certain things may come up and may not come up, and not just assume that's what's happening, it is really, really important. And thank you. And this was great.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy. That was a fantastic conclusion. And as I mentioned in my introduction, the patient voice is always at the heart of everything we do. And I can proudly announce that in 2023, the IACH will launch a specific initiative to for the patient and to bring their voice into the arena. So you have to stay tuned. So for the time being, I'd like to thank you all for being loyal to the Journal Club. I hope that you have enjoyed this discussion. Again, I'm very grateful and thankful to Professor Nagler, Professor Kumar, but also Cynthia Shimulski on behalf of all the patients. And as we always say, wherever you are, please stay safe and keep well. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye,
Mohammed.
everyone.
Bye.